We are back with another episode of the Advanced Colorado Rundown. I'm Michael Fields, the president of Advanced Colorado, and we're happy to be joined today by Barb Kirkmeyer, state senator, newly announced candidate for governor, and we're happy to have you here, Barb.
Thanks for having me. It's always great to be here.
So the first thing that I want to talk about was some of the stuff that happened kind of at the end of a session into special session.
Sure.
And a little bit about what the Democrats are doing to try to grab some of this revenue. I know they did a tax on overtime. We did a lawsuit that you joined going after this, saying it needs to go to voters, basically, if you're going to raise taxes. So I guess what were your thoughts kind of at the end of session and then dealing with special session?
So you're correct. They tried to sneak one by us and increase taxes back up on overtime and do it in the future. And, you know, TABOR is very clear. The Taxpayer Bill of Rights is very clear that if there is a net revenue gain and a change in tax policy, you're supposed to go back to the voters. It's supposed to be voted on by the voters. And for some reason, they are totally against doing that. They don't like to have to go back and talk to the voters because they know that voters like their Taxpayer Bill of Rights, but they also, I don't think they would understand, why are we putting taxes back on overtime? Just doesn't make sense. And then that just led us right into the special session where, you know, the one-party control, my friends across the aisle want to say that, oh my gosh, those ridiculous Republicans back in Congress gave you tax relief. It ends up giving you tax relief at the state as well, which reduces our tax revenues. And therefore, we have to come back now and just tax you some more. And that's what we did in the special session. We didn't cut the budget. We didn't cut spending. All that happened in the special session is they carried several bills to increase taxes to the tune of about $250 million. And they actually made our budget situation worse. They passed two bills that gave, that we're going to sell $250 million worth of tax credits for $200 million. That's another $50 million we're going to be in the hole, and it makes it worse. It makes our budget situation worse. And on top of it all, we're projecting that we will have a TABOR surplus in the next budget year. So we literally are trying to balance the budget by increasing taxes on small businesses and hardworking individuals just so we can refund it to somebody else in the next year. It's crazy.
Yeah, so we've seen this kind of movement to do stuff like this, now taking on more debt by, you know, trying to fill the budget this year is basically what they're doing in the one you just talked about. Also, fees have gone up a lot. I mean, you look back from when TABOR passed till now, I think it's up, you know, 3,400% or something. And you've seen this happen where they're creating more enterprises, more fees, trying to get around TABOR. I guess, you know, from that perspective on JBC, you know, what is going on with kind of the growth of fees and enterprises too?
Well, certainly we've been growing enterprises, growing the number of enterprises, which effectively increases the cap and increases people's taxes across the board type thing. And there isn't a fee they haven't liked. I mean, and you know, I keep telling them, you guys keep spelling fee, T-A-X. It's a tax. Their latest thing though, Michael, is, and we heard this at when the Joint Budget Committee met to see our September forecast, is now they want to blame everything again on Congress and on Trump for his tariffs. And they keep referring to tariffs as taxes. And I'm like, every argument you made today is the same argument we made during the special session. Mm-hmm. You're increasing fees. I mean, all anyone has to do is go register their vehicle. You see the long list of fees that are added on there. In fact, I think the fees are almost more than what it costs for me to license, you know, get my license plate every year. So yes, you're absolutely right. They just continue to increase fees. And in fact, again, I've heard this time and time again at the Joint Budget Committee from the chair. His comment is this: TABOR is why government can't have nice things. And I don't even wait for him to call on me anymore. And I just respond back with, TABOR is why the people get to have nice things.
That's right. And obviously thank you for your support of TABOR through the years. I think it's so important. We look at some of these other states where they're, you know, wasting so much money, you know, raising taxes. They're doing these big projects. That would never happen in Colorado on the tax side because voters get a say and can approve it. I guess my second question here is about kind of the long-term trajectory. You're watching revenue forecasts every few months. They're coming out. Over the last year, you know, we were going to get TABOR refunds, and then it kind of slipped and went underneath. And you know, it's kind of ironic. The the liberals in the legislature are trying to blame the national bill for not having TABOR refunds, but we were below the cap even before that. And obviously, we did get more tax relief, and that's a good thing for people. But I guess, what are your thoughts going into next year? We are projected to have TABOR refunds. Do you think that's happening? I've seen just a slowdown in revenue, given people aren't moving here as much. You have some businesses that might be leaving. I worry that that projection, that TABOR refund, because of the revenue side and the fees that we're talking about, the increases in regulations, making it harder for people to come and stay here. Do you see that impact, coming onto the budget next year? And do you think that projection of TABOR refunds is kind of dwindle as time goes on?
Absolutely, I do. And it has dwindled over the past 3-4 years because our revenues have gone down some. Again, because of the economy, the cost of living here, the unaffordability, the unsafe neighborhoods, that type of thing. People are moving out of the state, not necessarily moving in. I mean, we see a migration out of the Denver area, certainly. And I don't know that they're necessarily staying in the state of Colorado. So looking at the forecast, yes, our revenues are down, but let's be clear, we are not in a recession. It's not like we don't have additional revenues every year. I mean, in the last budget year, we had like $1.2 billion more revenue, and it just wasn't enough.
Yeah, and that's the point is, the way they talk about it, even in the middle of the session, is that we're in a deficit, going into next year we're in a deficit. That's because we've promised and we're spending, right? We're spending too much. That's not because we're not getting more revenue. We're getting over $1 billion every year,
yes,
growing into the state budget. But you would think that this means there's a cut, right? That we're going less than we were the year before. And I think people don't understand that because of how people at the Capitol talk. But you just said $1.2 billion more.
That was last year.
Last year. And this is the bad year, right?
That was the year where we had a $1.2 billion structural deficit. Right. It's a structural deficit, which occurs from overspending year after year. So just to give you an example, over the course of the Polis administration, revenue coming in, adjusted for inflation, has increased by 11.3%. So you would expect government to increase by 11.3%. Wrong. We have departments like the health department that's increased by 200%, or most departments have increased anywhere from 30 to 40% above our adjusted revenue increases, right? Even last year, when we told everybody that there is I lectured several times on the Senate floor, and when we told everybody that there was a structural deficit, a $1.2 billion deficit, we needed to cut spending and fill the hole, they still overspent. Inflation was at 2.4%. Our general fund operating expenditures, 3.6%. That is overspending. That's like the least amount we've done, though, in the last 7 years. Yeah. But again, just overspending. And no, they don't cut. They have, my gosh, when we were in the Joint Budget Committee, it is so frustrating some days. I mean, seriously, they sit there and they wring their hands over trying to cut $100,000. And I know that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money to me. I'm not an independently wealthy individual. It's a lot of money, but they're wringing their hands over it. And I'm like, just make the cut. But I will tell you, I was so frustrated and so disappointed in my Democrat colleagues on the Joint Budget Committee 2 days after the special session, when we weren't allowed to make budget cuts. We didn't get to cut spending. Right. They only increased taxes during that special session. 2 days later, the governor comes back and cuts funding to Medicaid provider rates, which will impact all of us. If we lose medical providers, if hospitals are shutting down, that impacts everyone in healthcare. And I'm looking at my Democrat colleagues going, are you not going to say anything? Can you not find something else to cut? Why are we cutting healthcare access for essentially everybody in this state?
So I have a question on that. And, the governor got a lot of authority to make some of these cuts. What were your thoughts being on JBC and kind of dealing with this day in and day out? Did you feel like legislators should be the ones deciding that? Did you think that that should have been handed over to the governor in order to do that? What were your thoughts?
The governor did get some additional authority. I mean, he got some additional flexibility. The authority was there to begin with, because quite frankly, Governor Owens, when I worked for Governor Owens, he came in and told us just straight up as departments, you will cut 10%. First he said you'll cut 4%. Then he came back and said, now you need to cut another 10%. And this was back in 2001. So the authority is there. And when we're not in session as a legislative branch, we don't have any authority. I mean, we don't pass bills unless we're in session. And that's when we have, any kind of influence and authority what's going on. So there does need to be that ability for the executive branch to cut spending, and they already had it. What occurred with the bill that they were passing, though, is they lowered the threshold with regard to how much we are losing, how fast we're losing revenues in this state. So they lowered that threshold, making it easier for him to go in and make cuts at different times. So, I wasn't as concerned about that. It's, you've got to have the executive branch has to be able to react to if we were have to recession, or if we had another 9/11. Let's hope that never happens, or those major fires that we had back in 2001. You have to let the executive branch react to that. But here's the thing: the governor already has the ability to not spend. I mean, as a joint budget committee member, as a legislative branch, we have to write a budget to current law. So we have to say, yeah, current law says we need money for this program and we have to spend this amount. We have to write to current law. The governor's office, the executive branch, doesn't have to spend to current law. They could have already cut spending, which is what they should have been doing.
So the left has come out recently and said, well, what we need to do is raise taxes, right? That we need to have a progressive income tax. We need to increase the rates, and has this whole range of rates that they're going to go up to. But basically the top rate would be over 9%. Right now we're at 4.4, a flat tax. Everybody pays the same amount based on their income. And I guess, what are your thoughts on this idea of, hey, we just need more revenue. We need to tax people more in order to fill this budget gap?
I'm totally opposed to it. We don't need more revenue. This is an administration, one-party control, that has a crisis of priorities. They cannot determine what their priorities are. For 15 years, we balanced the budget on the backs of students and didn't follow the Constitution. It took myself and Senator Lundeen, two Republicans, to push forward and get rid of the so-called BS factor, which, I grew up on a dairy farm. It meant something totally different to me at first. But we got rid of that. And then they turned right around and started saying, but now we just need more money to keep spending. So no, they need to cut spending. They need to determine what their priorities are, and we need to fund those. We need to stop funding all of these additional offices. We need to stop creating new departments. We need to stop hiring over 7,000 new state employees over the course of the last 7 years. Think about it. Even if you pull out the employees that are related to higher education, this executive branch, this governor's administration, has increased full-time employees in the state of Colorado by about 600 to 700 a year on average. Those are the types of things where we need to stop spending, and they just won't stop. So giving them more money, feeding their habit, if you will, is not a good idea. Anytime they want to open up TABOR, not a good idea when it's coming from the Democrats.
So I have two thoughts on that. One, on the progressive income tax, you're basically going to be chasing revenue out of the state, right? They want more money to spend on government, and they're saying, you know what, we're going to make it an incentive for, people that have businesses here or make money here to go to another state that has no income tax, right? Why would you not go to Wyoming or go to Florida, Texas, et cetera, and have lower taxes there? The second point, and I thank you for your work on getting education funding the money that it should have. My concern is that not enough of that money is getting into classrooms, getting to teachers. And it's one of those where, yes, we should be doing this, but we also need to make sure that money gets to teachers. Obviously, that's a local control. Each district's looking at that. But I guess, what are your thoughts, looking at it from that budget perspective of saying, how do we make the push, or at least talk about how we get more money into teachers' pockets? Because, they don't get paid enough, but you're providing the funding at the state level in order to do it. And we're just not seeing that kind of across the state happening.
It may be in that case. First of all, let me just say this. With regard to education funding, I've been a budget hawk on it, a watchdog on it, ensuring that we do have the funding and that we're keeping promises that were made years ago with regard to education funding, and that we're following our constitutional mandates. So we are funding education as required under the Constitution. But also, this last year I passed an amendment called the Kids Matter Fund. We created this Kids Matter Fund that says an additional 0.0065% of 1%, essentially, so 0.65% of 1%, will go towards education to the total program, so the dollars that specifically has to go to the per pupil funding and the categorical funding. Unlike what's in the state education fund, which is used to do grants and it's spent all over the place, where it was intended to go to total program and the categoricals. So worked on cleaning that up some, but you're right. And I'm thinking with regard to teacher pay, that isn't something that the legislature decides. We allocate funds, and it's the school district's local control, like you said, who make that determination. Superintendents and school boards who determine what teacher pay is. But, I've been thinking about this quite a bit, especially since I've been seeing all the chatter out there and talking to folks. There is ways which and kind of tried to do this with an amendment a couple of years ago on the Senate floor, and Senator Hansen was like, no, we can't do that. And all the Democrats voted against it, was how do we increase teacher pay specifically? And, we do this with like district attorneys. We fund a certain portion. And then if you want to go over and above that as a local government to pay more to your district attorney, then that's on you. But at least you guarantee sort of this set salary across the board. It might be something like that we need to look at. There also was a system a long time ago, a state merit system, and it was really used in the social services and human services realm. I know we work to get rid of it at the local government level, but maybe that's something we need to bring back so that we can be consistent and that we know that the funds that we are directing towards school districts are going to the classroom. Because, I've seen your posts, I've seen what Common Sense Institute has put out there. I mean, only 55% of the funds are going to the classroom.
Yeah.
I'm totally in support. Let's figure out how we get those funds to the classroom and to the students.
Yeah, and I'll make a plug for people to get involved at their local school district too, and ask that question: how much money is going to teachers? Who are we electing the school boards? That's a whole nother situation. But I look at state legislators and people at the state level that can talk about it, can share the word about it. But we've consistently, year after year, been around that 55, 56% range, and that I think isn't good. And I do think money should be going there, but it should be getting into classroom to help students learn and the teachers to make a living. So,
I just want to add on, legislators have this false narrative that they like to continue to put out there. Every time they say, oh, we need money for the kids and we need money for education, it's like, we've got to increase teacher pay. The legislative branch does not determine teacher pay. So every time you hear a legislator say that, it's just a false narrative. It's a political gimmick that they're trying to use to get you to increase your taxes so that they can spend more somewhere else.
That's exactly right. So I appreciate that. The one last thing I want to shift to is I was thinking about Weld County and basically what happened recently there with Sheriff Reams putting out some information. Basically, a guy who had an attempted murder had to get out because of was considered to be incompetent, and then got rearrested a few days ago carrying a gun on a college campus. And I guess my thought on, there's been several stories now that have come out. Solomon Galligan was another one.
Yes.
There's been 3 or 4 of them, high-profile ones recently, basically saying people are getting out because of incompetency that have kind of dangerous, very dangerous charges on them that end up being dropped. I guess, what are your thoughts? Does a change need to happen in that? Is that something the legislature might do this next session? Where is this issue going?
So in 2024, we passed a bill, 241034, and that bill basically made sure that we were lined up with the Constitution and what the Supreme Court had already ruled on with regard to competency. I mean, if someone is deemed incompetent, our Constitution, the Supreme Court ruled on this way back in the 70s, you can't just leave them sit in jail. That's unconstitutional. It's, violates due process, all these other things. So what we thought we were passing in 2024 was a law to adjust and ensure that we were adhering to the Constitution. What we have found out now is there's a hole in that law. There's a gap. I've talked with Sheriff Reams. He's a good friend of mine. He's very strident on this, as he should be. And we need to fix it. We need to fix the hole. We need to fix the problem. I've talked with district attorneys. I think, in talking with, for example, the district attorney from El Paso County, I think that's the 18th Judicial District, he's like, we need to flip the presumption of whether or not they're competent and flip it on to the defense instead of the prosecution. And I'm thinking, so there is a fix. And I think we should go fix it. I don't know why we have to wait. I don't know why the governor is not calling for a special session. I mean, it didn't take him that long to call for a special session to increase our taxes. Right. How about, and I know there were several people who said, just add this on back in August, and he wouldn't do it. I don't understand why he wouldn't do it. The problem was already existing then. He knew it was a problem. We need to have a special session. We need to fix this hole. And I'm all about, let's go fix it. As I've said, I've talked to law enforcement, I've talked to district attorneys. There is a fix. Let's just get it fixed before something even worse happens, because we know there are more of these cases coming. And here's the other part though. This is not just one easy fix. I mean, we can fix the law, which I think will help. With regard to the competency and who has to make that determination and who has the responsibility to get the evaluations done and make sure that people truly are incompetent. I mean, if there is a mental illness or a development disability, they can't just sit in jail. So we need to get them to the services and to the place they need help. But here's the other problem. year over year, we don't fund enough to our institutions. We have 2 state institutions, one at Fort Logan and one in Pueblo, to house these individuals. The 2 together equal about 500 beds. Depending on who you talk to, we have anywhere from 360 to 600 people on a waiting list to get into one of those institutions. Yet year over year, we have people who vote against the budget, people who don't want to increase that funding, and that's a problem. So that's the next step. Not only do we need to fix the bill, we need to make sure that we are funding appropriately, the Department of Corrections, these institutions, so that we have the facilities to place these people in, whether they're criminals and they need to go to jail, correctional facility, or whether they are mentally ill or have disabilities that they need to go to institutions. We need to be funding that. And that's where I was back to that crisis of priorities that my colleagues across the aisle have.
Yeah, and I totally agree. You talk to whether it's George Brockler, the DA in Douglas area, or even Amy Padden after
Exactly.
Sullivan Galligan happened, said something needs to happen. And I totally agree. It's a larger problem in that we don't have enough beds for people who need it in terms of getting this mental help that obviously some people need. I was out in Logan County talking about this, and they're like, we don't have the ability, we don't have the room for this. But I also think that it should be in statute that if we're letting people out, if we're having people that don't fit, in the amount of beds we have, that it's not the violent criminals who did attempted murder or something like that, that we need to prioritize keeping in and giving treatment to the people who are dangerous. I also think the problem is once you drop the charges on somebody because they're incompetent, there's nothing that's holding them more than a few days or maybe a month at the most, right? Like once charges aren't hanging over you, then you basically can voluntarily leave, and that's what's happening. And so I just think there's some tweaks that definitely need to happen.
Absolutely.
But we watch these things, and a guy who tried to kidnap a kid is out back on the street. Somebody who tried to murder somebody or who did murder somebody in another case in El Paso County, there has to be something that can be done with that. So I appreciate you saying that. I do think the governor should have added it in special session. We asked him to do it at the time. He said no. There could be another special session. But really, if that doesn't happen during that next session, I think is the time that we really need to get this dealt with.
Absolutely. And early on in the session. There's no reason why we have to wait till the middle of May to get this bill passed. We should get it passed and get it signed into law immediately so that we have this fixed. Absolutely.
Well, thanks, Barb. Thanks so much for joining us on this podcast. It's been great having you. That's all for today. This is the Advanced Colorado Rundown, and we'll have another episode soon.